Hello and welcome to an afternoon session of Leviathan News. We have a special guest, BackTheBunny. Welcome.
Hello,
Hey guys. Thanks for having me. Great to be here. I appreciate the outreach.
Nice
Yeah,
to have you on.
absolutely. We were talking about Milady's, and sure enough, just like a day later, you popped out your thread.
Yeah, I've been thinking about that for a bit, and I've been a fan of him for a while. And I thought it might be interesting to kind of opine on why I personally thought they were being so successful and why they're like part of a continuation of counterculture trends that keep evolving and escalating in response to escalating cultural pushback. And yeah, I just thought it'd be a cool parallel.
Can we talk about countercultural trends? Because I don't think there is counterculture anymore, at least not in the sense that we had it like 15 or 20 years ago. It's almost dead. Like counterculture is dead, except for these like dark recesses of the internet. You know, like you're not walking out and like gawking at some punks or goths and wondering why society is wrong now. Now you're like questioning the philosophical construction or the philosophical meta-analysis that goes into like meme life instead.
Yeah. And you know, it's funny. You said their counterculture's dead. Then you went on to enumerate the countercultures, though. They're just not manifesting in ways that are traditionally how they present themselves. And I think that's a continuation of kind of the technological proliferation and adoption of us existing increasingly online and digitally. So that's where this is. That's where the edgiest people are inhabiting and kind of growing these sort of movements and visuals. Whereas like beforehand, before we had the internet, when it was punk and it was goths and mohawks and I got images there of like Fred Durst and Limp Bizkit kind of stuff. Like the internet wasn't like cool yet, right? The internet was sort of like what Urbit or what even parts of DeFi is now, like kind of nerdy, weird space where only like techies or guys who like really are into it go. And now the is now a place where like you could say the Mohawk wearers of the 70s are existent. And it's just not very visible in like a meat space manifestation. Like if you go out and walk around, you'd be like, where's the counterculture? Like I just see a bunch of normies. And I think it's because the counterculturers have abandoned that space largely. Like the digital sphere, I think, is where that occurs. And it's where like if you're, a very online person like all of us are, and like I certainly am, almost too much so, you start to see that. And you see the leading indicators of where these countercultures or of where these movements happen. And the dark recesses of the internet you described now, hey, that's the Satan worshiper of the 60s, right? Of the 70s, of like, oh my God, I can't believe he said that. He's Satan. Like, that's horrible. Like, ooh, I hold my cross up. I can't accept that. I mean, that's what Milady is. Milady is literally like holding up an upside down cross and being like, look at it. Look at it. Like, that's what we are. And it's having the response that Satan worshiping had in like the 60s, 70s. Like, holy shit, like this is terrible. But like that's the design of the gatekeeping mechanism of how they make the statement that gets noticed, push back on orthodoxy that kind of has permeated things, and go out of their way to be repellent to establishment norms, beliefs, orthodoxy, etc. It has to be like overtly just visible and repellent in that way to send the message. And that's why I like look past the explicit communication of them and like the implicit communication of them. It's like, what are they really trying to do when you say things like that? Because there's like two reasons why you communicate. One is like directly what I'm trying to say to you, and the other is to maybe send a message. And to me, Miladies are sending a message. It's not really the explicit communication. It's the messaging of what this is repudiating. So
yeah, I think it's almost like a signaling mechanism where you think back about like you'd be the lone goth in your city, right? You're essentially like dressing a certain way to signal a certain set of like ideals or music tastes or like really just tastes and preferences in general, right? And that by eschewing the normie structure of typical life, right? You're like blatantly showing how you think or what you consider the world in a kind of epistemic sense. But now, like modern fashion has, in almost the internet, really, it's really the internet has co-opted everything to the point where, you know, you talk about Satan worshiping. Now you have some of like the largest celebrities in the world wearing like upside down crosses and like, performing like satanic style rituals on stage in their concerts, and no one bats an eye. They just say like,
normified. Exactly. When counterculture becomes culture, it becomes boring and unremarkable. But yeah, exactly right. Anyway, yeah, keep going.
Yeah. So like, I think in the physical space, like we've gotten to the point where, you know, TikTok, Instagram, everything else has taken the like physical countercultures, and I think they're all destroyed, right? They've all kind of migrated onto the internet, because the internet is like the last vestige where your like normie people just don't understand, right? People can understand fashion and culture and fashion and clothes and stuff, but like deep Milady memes are a little bit more difficult, I would say.
And to extend the analogy a bit, like in the 90s, all the moral panic out of Washington, D.C. was rap music lyrics, right? Now, you know, rap music is performed at the Super Bowl, right? But now out of Washington, D.C., it's Elizabeth Warren blasting shadowy supercoders. So you're right on that level. We are the new moral panic. Yeah,
and that's a great point. I mentioned, like, you know, it went from rock music to like now that's innocuous and no issue to like gangster rap, and now it's like, all right, now that's whatever. You know, it was Allen Iverson and tattoos in the early 2000s. Like he can't wear that sitting on the sidelines, and now it's like they all dress that way. So like you just see this continuing like movement of the Overton window on what's acceptable discourse, what's acceptable presentation, etc. And, you know, like it's an escalation of that basically to now we're not in the sphere of visuals. We're in the sphere of like ideas are the counterculture. And that's kind of what Milady does. And another reason why they're inherently kind of valuable and why signaling in general is valuable is, I mean, humans always try to bucket themselves into, we try to form heuristics, right? And like you even see it in prisons, with gang tattoos. If they can't segregate themselves by race, they'll segregate themselves by tattoos. You see it in the business world. You know, you guys mentioned, some of you've been in Midtown Manhattan before. Like you can pretty easily tell the finance bro types from, you know, other certain things, like they'll wear the vest or whatever. So people like to have signaling that shows immediately how you can associate themselves. And like the goth back in the day, you could just look at them and immediately tell, okay, you reject. I know you're going to I already know what viewpoints you're going to have about certain things, just purely off your dress, what you're making, very flamboyant. It's like peacocking, right? Like I'm signaling immediately like what I think. And the Milady is like the peacocking of, you know, the internet counterculture thing. And it solves like a 4chan coordination problem of, you know, an anonymous forum. You really can't coordinate people outside of that. It's very hard. It's sort of a way to actually unify them and like, hey, listen, you can tell by my PFP and by this, I have these associated kind of mentality, belief, etc. I'm the punk rock of the internet, you know, and it just allows them to coordinate better too. So like, there's like a manifold kind of like social signals going on here with them that I just, you know, I think I love.
Whereas Bored Ape doesn't really say the same thing, right?
No, it does, just in different ways, right? Like, you know, Bored Apes is not. I think Bored Apes is trying to expand the brand.
Bored Apes tells people you're willing to give them your seed phrase if they ask politely in DMs.
But Bored Apes is the. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I think it's just touching on your point. I think the difference between Bored Apes and Milady emphasizes the exact cultural difference that you've mentioned, Bunny. Like, if you make it mainstream, if you make it within a norm, it's not cool anymore. That's it. So we need something else. And to me personally, the Milady is so intriguing. Like to see this community, it's so organic and authentic, and really has a specific culture and ideals of its own. That honestly, it's right now by far, in my opinion, the strongest NFT community because they're not. I don't know how to say it in English, to be honest, but there is no condition. They are Miladies because they are Miladies, not because there is a treasury, not because they offer stuff, not because there is a roadmap and a big company behind them and all that. The exact opposite, and I think that's what keeps them so authentic and united, you know.
Yeah, and that lack of of like documentation and leadership I touch on in the thread too, like that is disorienting to, you could say, normies who, I shouldn't say normies, like people are oriented around structure.
It is normies. No, it is.
Like, I mean, that's fair. But like, I mean, even I like my own structure depending on what's happening. But like in a cultural realm, if you remove like the orienting structures of like, a roadmap, a white paper, a leader, that's disorienting to normal NFT types. Like, oh, wait, what is this? This is just a scam project. Like they're looking for the normal heuristics that let them understand where value or credibility lies. And not having that immediately gatekeeps or self-selects for removing those people. So like all of these things they do like keeps self-selecting to remove the type of person who needs these normal things to kind of feel comfortable. And like, I guess Bored Ape does communicate something, but Bored Ape, if Miladies are Mohawks, like Bored Apes are a baseball cap. Like they're just safe. They're normal. They're like, I'm following things that are okay and comfortable. I'm doing something that an HR department at a company would be okay with. Right. That's a communication, right? So it's.
Yeah. But don't you think they're a victim of their own success where, you saw this kind of with punks, like as the punks gain popularity, it became like way more milquetoast as they spread. You get a lot of people who may not even be associated with like the early Ethereum culture starting to buy them and using them as their PFP. Same goes for the apes as well too, where like, they're a victim of their own success where, you have Eminem and other celebrities, basketball players, like changing their PFPs to be Bored Apes, right? And
right.
And like really leaning into that as like an identifier. And I think like there definitely is waves. Like if Miladies were to get super huge, to the point where they're like 50 ETH a piece for the NFTs, like maybe there would be a sea change in opinion and like something new would come along. But I do think there's something like you can say like sinister or like deviant or I don't know, like just there's something a bit different, right? They're not as you wouldn't call them as mainstream as those two, right? Because those two have generic art styles. One's 8-bit for punks, the other one's kind of like comic style. Well, Milady's like is derived out of this 4chan idea of like the like fat, like a fat animes guy ideal of a woman, right? Of how they would want it, right? And so
right.
Yeah. And so there is something like quite specific of internet culture that defined what the Miladies are.
Yeah. And that victim of your own success thing, well, in a cultural movement, that's an inexorable problem. Like if your counterculture movement is ultimately successful, that success defined here simply means more people catch on to it, more people put it, the PFP are associated with it. That means you dilute the tribalistic kind of narrow beliefs that kind of it was founded upon. It gets diluted a little bit, and then it kind of becomes a little lame and not cool anymore. But then those people move on to the next thing and make it cool, and then everyone plays catch up to that. So that's like kind of a cycle of how anything culturally has been edgy, interesting, catches people's beliefs. Now it's mainstream. Now it's whatever, and then it's on to the next. So. Yeah, and you can tell Bored Ape is very compliant and normie core friendly because all of those celebrities put it as their PFP. Like, I'm sorry, Eminem is not that edgy anymore. Actually, he was really edgy back in the day. I don't know if you got. I mean, I grew up on Eminem. I remember the Marshall Mathers LP. Like, dude, that he went hard in there. He would never publish something like that today. Like, which speaks to like how neutered he's become, and frankly, kind of like PC rap, right? Like, he actually kind of is. And you can tell, like when Steph Curry, when all these guys do Bored Ape stuff, it's like, okay, well, this is a very safe thing to be. This is not counterculture by virtue of the large people initially off the bat gravitating towards it. So yeah, Milady's cool. It might become not cool eventually just by virtue of everyone liking it, but that means they were successful, I guess. And then those same people are going to go even further out onto the curve and start the new thing. And that's just the cycle that it always happens.
I mean, are there any like, I'll go a second, Garrett, but are there any like countercultures that we can point to which I guess never made the mainstream and still exist as that were never like commodified and commercialized?
I mean, they'd have to by definition be not successful then. Like you can all look at all subcultures here, like gamers as an example. Like I remember the gaming community in like I don't know if that counts as a counterculture, but they certainly seem to have some Milady-esque undertones to them, like back in the day, like you could say around the Gamergate time or so. And now gaming is, it's very open and not that. So I think that, like, to answer your question, if we were to find those, then they would be definitionally not successful because they didn't catch on and become like for them to be successful means eventually they become normal and lame.
Right.
It's sort of like this catch-22 of counterculture success. You are, if you want it to win, that means within a year or so, or however long it takes, it's going to become not cool anymore, and you got to be innovative and move on to the next if you're someone who wants to keep it up.
So,
I think I really like your analysis about all this stuff. I definitely can relate to it. What were you saying, Gert?
I have a couple of questions. First of all, how does all this relate to kind of the Elon Musk effect? Because when Elon Musk tweeted the Milady, like, I don't follow Elon Musk, but like it just blew up my timeline because everyone was talking about it. But then also more particularly to something you have expertise with, like, how does this Milady counterculturing signaling tie to your Vietnamese farmer thread, which basically you talk about how like crypto's under attack, so we need to adopt the mindset of a guerrilla Vietnamese farmer fighting off an imperialist power. I'm curious to hear how you synthesize the two.
Yeah, so Elon with the Milady meme, like obviously he's still in close touch with Grimes, and Grimes has some like Milady adjacent, sort of things going on and what have you. So I'm sure he found that through way of them. He probably doesn't know anything about them beyond. I would be surprised if he actually knew anything about Milady. The meme is funny, like "there is no meme, I love you." Like that's a really, like, just as a template, it works, and it's kind of his speed in terms of memetics. I think if he had found anything that was kind of funny or cute that had that, he might have shared it. So I'm not sure if it comments much on Milady. It does make it more visible, but I don't think it at all signals that like Elon is like a fan. I think Elon just like tweets things that Elon likes attention, obviously. I mean, we all do, but like Elon loves the visibility, and he does like our space. Like I see some of the people he follows in like the AI sphere, and some of the stuff he comments on for CT accounts, and he looks at our stuff. So and he likes us, and I think he wants us to think we're cool. He's cool, and I think that's like something he saw. Like, okay, well, hey, this scores me points. I think that's kind of his metagame. There is really just like, I want to stay in vogue, and to do that, I need to comment on things that people who use my account like, who use my business, my new property, Twitter, like. So I think he goes out of his way to make people feel like he's one of them. He'll reply guy on threads and tweets sometimes because it makes people feel good. That's a customer for life. When you get an Elon reply, like, holy shit, like, you are a Twitter lover, fan, power user forever. When he tells you I've subscribed to your stuff, like, dude, like he probably has, but he's not reading it. Like, he just wants you to feel like, hey man, I appreciate you. Like, it's the same thing as like a small business owner sending you a handwritten card saying, thank you for shopping at Larry's appliance store, right? Like, you're always going to go to Larry's now. Like, wow, it's kind of that thing with him. So I don't see like his behavior there as like an endorsement. I see his actions as very business oriented to make us like him. So that's on that one. And then how like Milady ties into like the Vietnam farmer kind of ethos, which it's funny, like the Milady PFP. I've heard a lot of people say, and I love this. Like, Milady is the wartime PFP. When you put a Milady there, it means like you're ready for battle. Like, they want Brian Armstrong to put a Milady there, like he's going to war. And which ties into like the Vietnam farmer meme that I have for like my Generations of War and Crypto series, where I'm basically likening, war is a leading indicator in business. It's been that way actually for a while in terms of strategies warfare adopts that usually, that sometime later business ends up adopting, and there are strong parallels there. When I was reading and learning about that, and just, on my own time, I was like, hey, crypto, we're not going to be different from this. Like, we're not special. Like, we're probably going to follow these same business oscillations and cycles. And war is a leading indicator for business. It's going to be a leading indicator for us. And that's why I don't think like, legal analysis, things like that. I think it's a game theory analysis to really understand how crypto ends up winning, which I think it very much does end up winning, because I think it's for the same reason Pirate Bay has won. You really can't stop peer-to-peer networks. They've been trying to stop that for a while. You can download whatever you want from Pirate Bay. Like, this is a peer-to-peer network that is obscenely well capitalized, is globally distributed, is armed with cryptography and AGI and has all the intellectual talent. Like, you're not going to beat us. Like, there's just too many of us. We're legion. We're everywhere. And kind of hearkening from the same kind of wars that the U.S. loses. Like, the U.S. is where it is because it's really won wars. Like, it has a great constitution, so long as it adheres to it, and system. But really, like, it won the most consequential war of the last 100 years, and it's won wars historically. But it's won those wars against big central powers, against Germany, against Japan, against Mexico, against the USSR. Right? It's really good at defeating central militaries that occupy land that have traditional manifestations of like violence. Who have they lost to? Like, they lost the Viet Cong. Like, they lost to Vietnam because it was just an exhaustive war that they didn't care enough about, and it's very, very, very hard to win guerrilla warfare. Who did they lose to recently? We just left Afghanistan a year ago. Goat hoarders. Like, we lost. Like, we spent trillions of dollars there, and Afghanistan is the same, and it's now run by the Taliban like it was before. We lost that war. So it's like, what's the theme there about why we're losing those wars? These are guerrilla warfare combatants that are fighting for their homeland, that care more than you do, and want to win more than you do, and they're using tactics that you're just not suited for. And I draw that parallel to us and regulators. Like, the SEC is built to go after Goldman Sachs. It's built to go after Deutsche Bank and Barclays and big central brokers and entities where I have a compliance department, I have a CEO, I have a business, I have an office, I can go in. Like, that's what the SEC was built to go after, understandably so. They're not built to go after tens of thousands of developers globally and millions of users globally using products with anonymizers like VPNs and mixers. Like, the resources are not there for the same reason that, we were not able to take on guerrilla warfare combatants. This is a way harder, way more advanced Vietnam farmer in what we are. So that's like when I say we are the Vietnam farmer. Own that meme and the tools you have, and understand that, like, for the same reason guerrilla warfare wins in these domains, it's going to win here. So just don't die. Just stay alive, keep doing your thing, and we're going to win.
I think the response to that is this increase in surveillance, right? Like, you simply cannot have a free and open internet and have, like, for DeFi to exist, there has to be free and open internet. And so the only way to combat all these things is to have like crackdowns, like you're seeing in Brazil right now, where they're like banning VPNs. Right. And then you fully KYC everybody who uses your internet. And then you're doing real-time monitoring of every single transactions. But like, that's pretty dark and twisted. And I know we're creeping towards that here in the United States, and some other major economies might have those systems in place at the moment. But I would hope that, free and open source and our free speech protections would somehow allow for this version of the internet that we have, or at least like the ideal version that we have in our heads to continue indefinitely.
Yeah. And a prediction I made in Generations of War Part 2, I said these are like two kind of angles I think they're going to take, because I ultimately do not think this is a zero-sum power game, and the US's empire and its ability to exert control is hugely precedented or predicated upon its ability to control financial infrastructure. Like, the way it does dollar diplomacy is through sanctions, and it does that through the banking system. It does that through SWIFT. It does that through disallowing Russia and Iran to do things. Like, crypto completely subverts that, and it completely subverts their ability to, get tax effectively, to know who's transacting, like to control the most important flow of information, which to me is money, because money is effectively communication of value. So that's how they run their thing, and that's what DeFi undermines. So, like, viewing this as a zero-sum power game, which means power absolutely is a zero-sum game. Like, economics is not a zero-sum game, but control is. Like, the control of this entity is getting reduced and disintermediated. They're not going to take kindly to that, and I don't think, I hope our documents and our constitution and our will as a people are enough to push back on political attempts to undermine us and completely subvert freedom of speech, but I don't think it will, because I ultimately think this represents an end game kind of for the U.S. empire as it is now. I don't think this means the U.S. dies. I just think it means it becomes like the United Kingdom or Germany, like, just an important country, but it's not calling the shots globally anymore. And I just don't think that, from a game theoretic standpoint, that's why I'm black-pilled near term, that they're going to come hard for us. They're going to come after VPNs. They've already dropped a bill that had language banning VPNs. In my thread, I said, like, they're going to go after VPNs, and they're going to go after cloud providers. Like we already know banks are doing Operation Chokehold. That's obvious, right? The flows. But what are the next linchpins? VPNs for anonymizing. There was a bill that was released recently. It was like using a VPN for a banned product is like $25,000 fine or like something ridiculously onerous. That was in a U.S. bill recently. U.S. That was maybe like a month and a half after I put that out. And then I think next up too, they're going to go after the likes of AWS and Azure cloud providers that help with nodes and validators and front ends and stuff like that. Being like, hey, listen, this is an OFAC sanctioned entity. Is there KYC happening here? Oh, there's not. So you are aiding and abetting entities that are allowing OFAC sanctions to be subverted. You are in trouble, Microsoft Azure. Like Azure's not going to have any allegiance to us or AWS. They're going to dump us. So I think they're going to go after the infra as much as the banking. Yeah, so I would just encourage us to be prepared for that.
I mean, we were seeing this yesterday. We talked about this yesterday on Leviathan. We talked about a story where the European Union is drafting up like an AI regulation bill. And part of the bill is that open source AI models are illegal. Like you have to get a license, and hosting an open source model on GitHub would be illegal. And it would allow the law would allow the EU or anyone in the EU to sue that third party extraterritorially. So someone in the European Union could come to, say, Microsoft and say, we're suing you because, or whoever owns GitHub, right? Like to come to GitHub and say, we're suing you. This code is up. It's an illegal AI model that has not applied for the proper licensing in the EU. You're now liable for like $20 million. Thank you very much. Unless you take this down. And then they would go after, like past GitHub, they would go after like AWS instances that are running illegal models that have open API access.
Are you hiding an LLM under the floorboards?
Exactly.
Yeah.
No, I know it's funny. Like, are you hiding an LLM or are you hiding open source developers under those floorboards, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the EU though, like, dude, I don't even know what to say about that. Like, they just seem hell bent on just a regulatory, just like why is there no Apple or Microsoft or Facebook? Like, why does like nothing in Europe? Like, these are the people who leave the country. Their diasporas found those things here. Like, it's the same thing with Indians. Like, India doesn't have, I mean, India is much more developing than Europe, obviously. But like, when you take Indians out of India, they do a phenomenal job. Like, they're amazing here. Like, they're the CEOs of a lot of companies. So it's like, what about the Indian structures not allowing those people to be successful in India? I say the same thing about Europe. Like, why do Europeans, the diasporas in the US and otherwise, found these massive technology companies? But in Europe, like, what the best we have is ASML. Right? It's like a semiconductor company that's incredibly important, but it's not a big tech company. So like, their regulatory approach is just unbelievably backwards. And this is just a complete proxy for that. It's like, dude, what are you guys doing? Like, you just want to be completely left behind and be this like quaint vestige of just a nice place to go that just doesn't want to grow at all, I guess. I mean, whatever, if that's what they want, I suppose. But it just seems to be something rooted and run. Like, you can tell this is regulation by lawyers, not by technologists.
Is it just that though, or do you also think there is also an element of corruption? Because I think that society is built on hundreds of years with there's like a different type or amount of corruption in different parts of the world. And personally, I think that most regulatory issues are not really decided like we imagine them being decided for the greater good and all that stuff. I think corruption is a much bigger deal than we say, and that's exactly why even if they go for Deutsche Bank or Lehman Brothers or Goldman Sachs or whatever, usually they don't do that much because it's actually corrupt. They just need you to think they're doing something, not actually doing it.
Yeah, I mean, that's there to some varying degree everywhere, including the US. I mean, like pork and the lobbying that goes on, like I think that's corruption light to just blatant corruption. Maybe certain forms of it are more hidden in Europe and elsewhere. I mean, if there are kickbacks or things happening that kind of speak to why they would do that, then when you say corrupt, my thoughts in there on how that manifests is someone is receiving payments or benefits illicitly to put something out there from a regulatory standpoint or whatever. They're acting in their self-interest and not the self-interest of the of their constituency. Like that's what corruption is, I guess, if we're going to define that. And defining it on those terms, I'm not sure how like regulators and politicians are like, you benefit if your economy grows, you get more tax revenue, you get to spend more, you get to enrich yourself that way. You have to become richer though. Like if a good corrupt person understands that he's a parasite and needs to leech effectively off his host and make them stronger so he can become stronger, right? So it's like this behavior does not make your host stronger. Like it leaves you behind. It kind of it puts you in the corner of sub 2% GDP growth, if not less, for a long time. I just don't even see from a self-interested angle why you would not want this to at least allow yourself to stay up so you can keep milking the cow if you're that kind of, person trying to act in their self-interest. I just think they operate in this way that like the GDPR is a great proxy for this too. It's just a very like fear-minded Luddite approach to, I think it's just inertia, frankly, if I view the European mentality towards stuff. Anyway, yeah.
That's like too long-term of a mindset, I would think, though. Like if you look, like Rome took 500 years to fall. Nowadays it might be faster, but still, like the European powers you mentioned, it's been like a gradual decline. Politicians are in power for just a few short years, so I feel like if the Titanic is sinking, you don't try and right the ship. You try and grab the fine china and get to your lifeboat.
That's a good point. I'm describing corruption more from like the Chinese lens because they're in office forever and they don't have to worry about elections, right? Yeah, you're right. If you're shorter term, there's probably two tiers of corruption. One is enriching enough to stay in power to keep extracting value, and then one is like just near-term kickbacks, like Nancy Pelosi corruptism. Yeah, but even viewing it from that lens, I just don't get how disallowing LLMs or gatekeeping like that. Maybe you get your licensing fees higher, and people have to go through the regulatory process, which gets you fees for having to do that. It's just even viewing this as like a nefarious minded person who's trying to be like sociopathic and how do I act in my own interest? How does not letting OpenAI operate in your company? Where's the angle there?
No, but I don't think it's like the majors operating companies. I think it's fine because they can KYC everybody. They have the cost to comply with all the regulation. It's more about like smaller startups who just put code out there, right? Just release some code, release a model, like, or open source developers who just take some code and release it. Like, those sorts of things are I think are much more worrisome to this structure that we have. And it kind of comes back to why, potentially like AI and crypto will go well together, is that they're both heading towards this highly regulated path, or at least finance has been there for a long time, right? But this new sector of AI is also barreling towards being extremely regulated, and it could have an offshoot, like in the sense of crypto, where you have this fully unregulated, uncensorable AI model that's just out there and run by people with nodes or something. Like who knows what's going to happen there. And
they're already out there, by the way.
Yeah,
they exist. Like I have some LLMs from Meta. Like you can torrent them. They've been leaked. So.
Yeah. So I mean, this data is always going to get linked. I mean, like there's no moat in AI and there's no moat in crypto. Just you build on the back of memes, and you meme yourself into just existence, right? Which happened in Bitcoin. Bitcoin exists as a meme, and it's it continues as such.
Yeah, I would say like there probably is always structurally a moat in everything, and I would say like when the nature of open source though is to say that your moat is not your tech, like by definition, because everyone can see it, take it, right? So the moat is no longer what we would associate with the word moat with like a SaaS company or a normal company, where your moat is your IP, it's your brand, it's whatever. Whereas like the moats, there's not a moat in that standpoint from like LLMs or crypto. So like the moat is the data. The moat is the users. Like Uniswap doesn't have a moat, right? It's open source. Its moat is its liquidity and users. Like we're going to see how much of a moat that is, I guess, because I'm really not sure. Like if DYDX is successful with their app chain, that would be a really, really interesting thing, where if they're able to migrate their users and liquidity with them, that means that they control the relationship and it's not the layer one. That would put a lot of stress on the fat protocol thesis. So like, it's going to be curious to see how moats manifest with organizations and LLMs. Is it liquidity? Is it users? For LLMs, is it just data points? Is it the uniqueness of how those models are trained? And, guys like us can't retrain models with that. Like, we're not neural network engineers. So it's like, is that the mode on like the uniqueness of something there? Yeah, I have no prediction on that respect, but I'm just curious to know like how that probably manifests, because I think it will.
Well, I think we'll see a lot of growth comparatively to how we see growth in crypto, right? Where all of a sudden a developer like releases a model that does something wildly fun and maybe quite horrible at the same time, and people just flock to it, and it becomes a self-reinforcing meme that just grows and grows and grows. And I think that's what they're worried about, where we have AI, which can essentially meme itself into existence through these different model generations. And they've seen that they've been unable to control things in crypto land. So why not just double down and push for insane regulations before this industry is even off the ground? Plus, like all the weird fears about alignment and the eventual AI overlords. I just think it's all a bunch of bullshit. But
yeah, no, I'm with you on that. Not just because it's to me it's like a fear exercise, a control one masquerading as a cognitive one. Like the amount of guesses that go into a lot of these like extrapolations that I see on just assuming intention and what have you is just like the likelihood of any of this manifesting, like any of our completely outlier, like humanity is going to die scenarios like we saw in COVID, like we see with, I don't know, Y2K. Like you just see all of these doomsday type predictions on new events that just, I don't know, humanity tends to march on because the way you think the doom scenario just doesn't manifest. And to me, this is just the most perfect way to present the same kind of COVID-esque playbook where you have an unknown event, maybe in a super out there scenario, a lot of experts can model, and experts in quotes, can model a situation where all of humanity dies. So this represents a beautiful pretext to exert control over the way that this thing is allowed to exist. And this is the most important technology of our time. And unsurprisingly, who do you see on the timeline all the time from an AI standpoint? You see Elijah Yudowski, right? you see all the people who are on TED Talks manifesting fear, bad, oh my God, terrible. Like the same way you saw with Fauci and all the people back then, where it's like, this might kill everyone. And what are you able to accomplish with that? You can manufacture consent, to draw from like Chomsky's phrasing there. Manufacture consent based on fear that makes people willing and happy to give you control to protect them, because you're telling them how this might hurt and harm them. You're marching out the most neurotic people you possibly can on how this might occur and putting their scenario as the likely one or the plausible one. And then you guys got guys like Sam Altman who are obviously acting in a sense of regulatory capture. Like it just seems so obvious that's because that's the playbook. Like, and that's not even a Sam Altman thing. That's in any business does this thing. That's just how the world works. They want a regulatory capture when they're there first. Like, just accept that as a reality. So accepting that as a reality, it's like, guys, like, push back on this. Like, understand the playbook here. It's going to be the same playbook like COVID. They've done it before, and just, hey, build and do what you can to get around that, because they're going to try to exert control over that predicated on doomsday scenarios, because that's the exact trend you see now with who's getting visibility.
Switching gears a bit.
Bunny, you're just great. You're just great. You're officially one of my favorite accounts. I mean it. I'm having so much fun even listening to you most of the time, and your ideas and the way you express them. Honestly, can definitely relate and appreciate your thoughts. And
I really appreciate that, man. That means a lot.
Yeah. So for those who aren't familiar, could you explain what it means to be a Fed disrespecter?
Yeah, it takes it's a double entendre, I guess. But the way it primarily comes is a series I have on the Federal Reserve. So and basically how this was kind of a realization for me a couple years ago when I started looking into how QE worked and seeing kind of what actually happens, and based off the messaging of what happens. And the messaging is money printing. The messaging is what Balaji says. It's just they're dumping money everywhere. I was like, okay, wow, like, trillions of dollars, like, the Fed's balance sheet, like, holy shit, like, why isn't inflation higher? Like, that's just weird to me why inflation isn't higher. And like, I see the market reaction, but I don't see all this reaction that suggests money printing. And then you look into what's occurring, and it's just bank balance sheet movement. Like, they just move around basically a balance sheet of bank assets. They just swap bonds for M2 for money, which shows up as cash in the M2 statement, M2 reading. And it gets a lot of headlines, and people tend to think risk on, dive in, etc. Let's go. So like, okay, that felt off to me. And then I looked into like more and more of how they do the things they say they're doing, and kind of how the yield curve and like 10-year bonds and US treasuries work. And my takeaway and the essence of the Fed series that I'm working on is that this entity does not have the controller power that it's presented as having at all. I would describe it as like 85% a psychological institution and tool. It does do something. Like, I'm not saying the Fed does nothing, but I think it has about 10 to 15% of the power that it's purported to have. And the Fed disrespecting means disrespect this institution, disrespect the Federal Reserve. Like, stop giving the headlines and the commentary on whether or not they're going to raise rates by 25 basis points, which, by the way, when they raise the interest rate, they raise the target range on the federal funds rate. The federal funds rate is a rate that banks pay and repo markets pay for overnight lending. That's what that is. And they don't even control it directly. They set a target range for it and then have some tools where they try to keep it in that range, but it bounces out of that range though sometimes. And setting that tells the 10-year bond what to do. The 30-year bond, like, no, like, it doesn't dictate to that. And if you look at historically how these bonds have moved, and this is what my next thread in the series is going to be, that the Fed does not control interest rates. It's going to break down, and I won't spoiler it too much, but it's going to break down like what goes into the 10-year bond, like what actually manifests from that, how much do they, what happens when they raise rates to lower rates, and what does this asset do? So the essence of it though is to stop letting this psychological institution control you psychologically. They want headlines. They want you to look at them. They want you to pay attention to them. And everything you know about the Federal Reserve comes from the Federal Reserve. Everything. It comes from CNBC, which is a mouthpiece for the Federal Reserve. They will say everything one-to-one that a federal agent says about the power and majesty and omnipresence and omniscience of this institution. It's like asking a priest if God exists. Like, it's like going to a church and like, just is the power of God everything you say is? Like, obviously, like, you don't go to a priest to learn about real questions, right? Because you know his message. So the essence of that is stop listening to lackeys for Davos and Fed and the Federal Reserve, because they're going to say exactly what you think they're going to say. And this messaging comes from entities that need to defend this institution. So obviously they're going to say things that way, and approach it differently and actually look at what happens different from the headline. And when I look at what's actually going on, I don't see an agency that actually controls much of anything and that operates purely off lagging indicators and is somehow a leading indicator. They lead things by operating off lagging indicators. Like, just remember like what they operate on: unemployment, inflation. Those are, everything that feeds it. Like, those are lagging. That's lagging information. That's stuff that's already happened, and they're leading it by reacting to it. Like, even the logic of that, it's just, this is not an entity that has the power that it's given. And I trying to rally visibility on that. Yeah. That was a lot. So
I understand.
Would the obvious counterpoint to that though just be that like the money supply had very like tangible effects for the past few years? Was that just a psychological after effect of the Fed raising rates, or like did the Fed actually like influence the money supply?
So I mean, they definitely can directly influence the money supply, but they do that via swapping. Like, the Fed cannot create things. The Fed can swap things. So when they do QE, what they do is they go to banks. They say, hey, listen, you got treasuries, you have MBS, give us those. Here's cash for it. So imagine you as a person with a checking and a savings account, right? Imagine you have a checking and savings account. The savings account is the bond that pays you a little dividend, and I have it on my balance sheet. It's a tool for repo. And I swapped your savings account with a checking account. Okay, but you still have $10,000, right? It's like, okay, well, I guess maybe I'll spend it. Like, that's their hope that they'll maybe lend against it. None of that happens. Like, the banks, like, the velocity of money stays the same or goes down. Banks are not lending anymore. I haven't seen any data that shows, in like the Z1 data, that shows that credit creation is elevated because like banks lending money is what creates dollars. Like that's fractional reserve banking. So the Fed does this swapping game. It blows up the M2 chart though, because bonds are not part of M2. That's a big thing. And the M2 chart is when everyone looks at when you're pointing to like money creation, you're looking at the M2 chart, which is like time deposits, cash, and like things that can rapidly be changed to cash. I think money market funds. It's not bonds though. And so you take a treasury bond away from the bank that's not M2. I take $1 million treasury bond away from them. I give them $1 million in cash. Whoa, I just made there's $1 million more of cash in the world. But there's not $1 million more of assets in the world. The assets in the world stay the same. And that's the big emphasis I have is assets. They can't create assets. So when they do this game, they trot everyone on CNBC and onto 60 Minutes. And I'm going to put this out in a thread too, where it's like, what did Bernanke do? He goes on to 60 Minutes. We're going to print money. Janet Yellen goes on to 60 Minutes. We're printing money. Jay Powell, like they all go out and they say the same thing. Like that messaging is deeply important. Why do people on 60 Minutes need to know about like the monetary inner workings of what should be an esoteric Fed operation? What's the point of that? The point of that is raising awareness. So like every money manager in the world wakes up the next day, sees that and sees green light. Like that has a very, very strong psychological effect on why they trot out all of their lackeys, Bullard, Brainerd, et cetera, onto CNBC, onto everywhere. And they all say the same thing. And that is deeply important. And that basically gives this feeling of like, all right, I'm safe. Like the money, the infinite money pit has got my back. Let's buy. As far as like risk assets responding that way, like I genuinely think that is the answer. And I honestly think like that answer will get exposed as true maybe in like a decade or something. Once AGI is so smart, it's like, no, like, like that doesn't like it's not doing anything in that way. So I think the psychology of that is far and away the most important. I think you see the evidence of that when you look at Fed announcements and behavior and how deeply visible they are and how they go out of their way for this messaging, even on normie core shows and the uniformity of that messaging.
Well, can I just
I'll stop there.
To play devil's advocate here?
Sure.
The bond market is volatile, and the ups and downs can probably seem a little bit discombobulating to both money managers, banks, and retail people who are trying to plan. And so, what if the Fed is just trying to calm and assuage the fears? Because like you said, for the money supply to go, there needs to be more loan creation. And for there to be more loan creation, banks have to decide, oh, hey, we're going to greenlight these projects. And if we don't greenlight those projects, we just don't see any growth. And nobody's going to start building. Nobody will construct. Nobody will form new businesses. Money creation doesn't happen because like money creation is fine so long as you have a equal amount of like GDP creation or you borrow $100 million, you start a company, that company creates $10 billion worth of value, right? In new markets or something. That's what they're hoping for, right? So you need a nice, warm, friendly face to get up there and tell you that everything is okay. Our economy is great. You should take loans. Interest rates are not going to spike too high, and that you can plan for the future.
Yeah, but I mean, that speaks exactly to the psychological angling, though. Like, that's part and parcel kind of my point. Like, the point is them to go out and to make these entities. I'm not even calling that like deeply nefarious, I guess I should say. Like, that is important because people will not act if they feel uncertain. People hate uncertainty. Like, we're more comfortable with a known bad than an unknown unknown, right? As long as we kind of know what to plan for. Like, that's an ingrained human characteristic, is to fundamentally hate not knowing what happens next. We'd rather know something bad happens than not know at all.
Well, and a lot of just to stop there, like the unknown is typically what leads to these panics, right? A lot of what a lot of the Fed does, I mean, like in normal functioning times, I mean, their job isn't that really important. But when shit's hitting the fan, when people are pulling billions of dollars out of commercial banks like Silicon Valley or First Republic or whatever in the course of a couple of days, if unchecked, I mean, those could lead to or at least I'm sure they think that those things could lead to an all-in-all panic where people just start doing irrational things because everybody else is doing irrational things. And then the market gets completely broken because people get scared that their money's not going to be able to be taken out of the bank, or that like asset prices are going to be falling a huge amount or something. Like I just think that there is, you have to be able to talk markets, and there has to be a face to these systems, right? Even if they can't, even if they don't control it, because I don't think the Fed does much to control the bond market or the money supply. It's too decentralized, right? But what they can do is they can assuage everybody who works at a bank, or you and I, to build a house, to take out a loan, to like fund a business. Because if you have that uncertainty, then you turn into these like emerging economies where you don't have that safety. Maybe you talk about India, where like you wonder why everybody leaves and comes here. It's because our financial safety and security is just, we believe in it more, right? And it is a belief system. So there needs to be these like high priests that go out and tell us everything's okay.
And to rephrase this slightly, if even if we grant that what's going on here is just psychological operations, isn't it also the case that money is also just psychological? So it's sort of like the perfect weapon to control, psychological games to control a psychological effect.
Yeah. So to answer those respectively, on your point, Sam, on like based on the banking issue and the Fed's involvement there, like I want to disentangle like Fed behaviors here. I'm speaking about QE and about behaviors that is signaling to money managers and to markets, risk on, we're controlling the yield curve, we got this, we're printing money. Like when they say that term, and they use that term explicitly, intentionally, even though that's not what's happening. They use that messaging consistently. So that's on the QE front. On the front that you're talking about, which is on the banking crisis thing, that is also psychological, right? But that's not one I'm describing as nefarious so much. I do think backstopping and letting people know that banks are being backstopped by this entity is important. I think the BTFP program was important. I think it was necessary. It also was not money printing. It is simply a factoring loan, using bonds as the collateral. Corporations do it all the time, and it is. There's a reason held to market accounts, held to maturity accounts are a thing for a reason. Like, why do you think those exist for banks? It's because they get wiped out on paper when rates move. Like, obviously, this always happens. Like, this isn't new that when rates go up, banks get destroyed. And any bank, if you put a run on them, especially when everyone on social media is saying, hey, go, would get wiped out. Like, this isn't like some exigent, horrible, brand new thing that we've never encountered before. And I see guys like Balaji and Arthur hopping on that, like the world is ending. It's like, no, like banks are in a tough spot because of rates. The Fed and FDIC back that up. They should message that, letting people know, hey, we're backing this up. Like, the banking system is okay, obviously, because we're going to give loans. And it's a loan, emphasis on loan, because the Fed's fronting that deposit money. And then when the bond comes due or what have you, like, that's paid back. I want to emphasize the Fed has made money and the Treasury has made money on behaviors historically here. Even like TARP and back in like the financial crisis where they did all that issuance and they bought Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, what have you, the taxpayers made money from that. Like, they bought assets on the low, flushed it out, and then they got repaid with interest. So like this is almost like viewing it from a business decision lens. Like, again, these are like almost pragmatic if you view the government as like a quasi business here. So like like some of these things don't even cost taxpayers money. They've been profitable for the federal government. And I do think that messaging is important. And I'm not denigrating it that as like evil. What I am saying, though, especially with QE and stuff, is it can frame this correct. Like, what really bothers me more than anything, and I cover this in the Fed Part Zero, is like the point of this is to stop hyperfixating on someone doing jumping jacks and somersaults in front of you and focus on the arsonist behind her, which is fiscal policy, which is the debt, the debt. And, that is money printing when fiscal issues bonds to fund their spending that is extravagant, and they can't, they don't have the taxation to support that. That is what's causing problems. And that's the issue here. The Fed enables that a little bit. I'm not discrediting that. You can make some like second and third order arguments on QE that what it does is it can increase Treasury demand eventually in a way that lets fiscal issue more bonds. There's some truth to that. I just don't think there's that much fucking truth. I think it's very little. The Fed owns roughly about 20% right now of outstanding Treasury bonds, 20%. So like, you're telling me if we had 20% less debt, our problems would be different? Like, no, they really wouldn't. And to me, that's like, I don't know how else you quantify the Fed's attribution to this issue other than like that roughly. And to me, it's about 20%. And so that's the kind of viewpoint there is like, stop giving this institution credibility and focus. In the 1970s and 60s, apparently, this is before my time, apparently people didn't even know who the Federal Reserve official was, or like the 80s or something. Like Fed policy was not a headline news thing, is the point. And then Fed policy has increasingly become more and more like a headline news thing. And just ask yourself, like, why? Like there's a psychological component to that. And I think it's because if you didn't know QE was happening, I don't think you'd know QE was happening. I think it just, you just, and then to the second point, Curve, that you made on, what was your point again? Is money just psychological? I'm sorry.
Well,
yeah.
I mean, I half believe that. I think that like, it's not fake, but it is like, it has value that we give it. Right. And, you can adjust those value points, but I always think that we have to value something. Right. And so,
of course.
Yeah.
And worship something.
Yeah.
It's a belief system.
Yeah, but I don't think it's something that we invent. I just think it's something that, like, by process of enumerating and sorting the world, we create value systems, and those value systems are just inherent, and they're not like social. Yes, it's a social creation, but it's innate. It's not something that we can reconstruct.
I think
It's an
it's
information
something we simply agree upon, and when we see the majority agree upon something, it's so much easier for us to agree upon as well. So $1 is $1 because it's $1, and as everyone thinks it's $1. I think for 99% of the people, that's how it works.
Yeah, I mean, money is just a standardized form of information sharing. Like money exists. Like slandering like money is like, I heard this in like a Lex Friedman statement. It's like money is made up; it doesn't have value. Like money is just exists because bartering is not feasible. Like, I mean, that's basically it. Like if bartering was something that could be facilitated or technology could accomplish, like, yeah, I think you'd see a decreased demand for money. That's on the transacting front. And the secondary, like, it's either a transaction tool or it's a store of value. And money historically actually is not actually that great a store of value. It depends on the money, I suppose. But all it is humans unifying around something that they recognize as having characteristics that either retain value or facilitate transactions. And usually the most successful currency is the thing that does that in the most stable fashion. That's basically it. Like, there's no fetish for dollars here, is why most people take US dollars. Like the reason people accept US dollar for settlement is because it's the most stable. Like the US is the most stable large superpower. The dollar is relatively, again, stable relative to its peers. And it's a widely accepted medium of exchange. And it will be that until it stops being that, which will just take people being more circumspect of fiscal policy or actions that make them lose confidence in the dollar. But it is ultimately a confidence game. But that confidence allows us to interact freely in the world and basically communicate. Like, it's a form of communication of value.
Sure. But like, you talked about Lex Friedman's thing about how it's just all fake and made up. Like, I don't know. That's not true, because like I think it's a natural extension of our like moral and epistemic understanding of the world. And I don't think you can get rid of that, right? And so when we talk about these money systems, it's not even that they're like fake and made up, whatever. No, it's not true. It's just, you're right. It's an information system that transfers in like value back and forth. And we have the dollar. The dollar is just a way of valuing something, because like there is no $1 type, right? There's a lot of different dollar types, but it's more about the system of loans and accounting and judicial process that allows companies to be formed and business to be carried out. And you can change these things, but we're in a global competitive setting, and people like the dollar for what it provides and how they can use it.
Yeah. I mean, totally. Like, and I think the Lex's take on, or any, like the take just in general is like, man, money's just this made up thing. Why do we trust it? Like, that's like what an
Very like
intelligent
sapiens.
13-year-old.
It's like very fucking sapiens.
Yes.
Take.
Yeah, exactly. That's like what a smart 13-year-old kind of realizes or thinks about religion.
Like,
yeah, it's like describing religion as a sky wizard or something. Like, you're really missing the point on what religion is if you reduce it to like its nominal manifestations, the same way you're really missing the bus on what money is if you just view it as a piece of paper with a face on it.
Yeah, and like coming back to Lex, like I think of him, like you look at, like, to bring this whole thing back into Milady culture, right? Like Lex is the person. Lex is the person trying to be in the scene for Milady culture, right? That like sees that is a normie person from the outside who like sees the culture, but is not able to recreate it within himself because he just lacks the I don't know, je ne sais quoi, or like some like something wrong with him inside, right? And so he's ever striving to be this like shell of an ideal that is pursuing Milady culture, but is never able
He's a
to
hive mind. He's a hive mind proxy. Like you can tell hive mind proxies versus like, it's funny, it's trite, but I genuinely think this is a manifestation of like soft Asperger's or light autism when you are relatively immune to propaganda or to, I think that's fundamentally, if we want to distill autism down to like what we mean when we say it, it means you're rigidly logical in a way that misses social cues, right? Kind of like the Dwight Schrute awkward, I'm missing on these social elements, but I'm being very smart and logical. Like that's one form of it. Or it's being immune to a consensus viewpoint that you just don't think is right. That's basically it. You're immune to like these messaging that's all saying the same thing, and you fundamentally are able to view that independently and assess it on your own terms. And I think when you see someone who struggles with stuff like that, like that's not someone that doesn't. They don't get any autism points, basically. So.
Yeah, it's I wish we had several more hours to discuss this, like maybe in a dorm room with a box of pizza and like exams that we were putting off to discuss the grander things. Before you bounce though, BackTheBunny, you have a protocol called RabbitX, which you describe as perps on StarkNet. Is that correct? Could you go ahead and plug that or anything else you'd like to plug?
Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, so RabbitX, we're perpetuals DEX on StarkNet. Great community, amazing team. Mainnet has been going super well for us. We did 130 million in volume during closed mainnet, and we offer up to 20 times leverage, gasless trading, perpetuals on 8 markets right now, including all the majors, Arbitrum, ARB, ARB, Doge, SWE, Pepe. We're adding markets all the time. We're an order book model where our model is very similar to DYDX for people who have questions about like structure and how the order book works and things like that. Go visit my profile, join our Discord. Happy to answer any questions. But if you know how DYDX works, it's basically that. But we want to own this space in a big way. Our goal is more than just perps. Our goal is derivatives in any form, including commodities, FX, and a lot of other things, interest rate swaps. So we're starting with perpetuals because perps already have a strong product market fit in DeFi. They're a product people know and understand. We're getting some great initial traction there, and we're going to keep going full steam. Really strong, talented team, great backing, and I feel really grateful to be working and helping with us and all the stuff I've learned throughout this process. So check us out. All the info is on our profile, and if you're a perps trader or a trader of any kind, join Discord, look at our docs. We're as good as anybody. In fact, I think we're better, and we are objectively the cheapest. We have gas-free trading. I'm happy to explain on how we pull that off if you want to ask. And our fees are the lowest in the industry as far as I've seen. There are no maker fees, and we have a small taker fee that is, again, lowest that I've seen. So.
Excellent. I'll be checking that out. Thank you so much, and please come and join us anytime there's anything you'd like to talk about. Always welcome.
Yeah, my pleasure. Reach out. I'm happy to test more. I really enjoyed this.
Amazing. Well, until the tide returns, we are Leviathan News, and we'll be back tomorrow.
Amen. Thanks a lot, guys. Goodbye.
Awesome. Thanks, Dia, advisor. Nice meeting you.